exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So go ahead and re-ask your question so
Yeah.
it's easier.
Since back to about you, we were just ending on the statement of the dancing, and the general essence of it is the relationship you have with the music, harmonious. You can groove. There's different ways to express it. That's on you. But you said it's that the relationship, this connection. Now, music, animators, animation. What are your thoughts? Well, I know your thoughts because we shared about it. We already had a conversation, but
For the viewers at home.
for the viewers at home, what are your thoughts about the music that's played for animation, battles, events? Do you feel there is there's not a music for animation? Does animation need a type of genre of music? I mean, I have heard the statement, you've heard the statement that you don't need music. The music doesn't really, it's not a big factor. You can animate to anything.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of popping events, and that's the music, the popping music, the funk music. That is typically electronic. Funk music is played for animators, but also for roboters and also for poppers. So what are your thoughts in that general area?
Yeah, this directly relates to not having a cohesive definition of animation. Because we don't understand its principle, it's really hard to define what kind of music fits it best. Which is why two of my basically schools of thought regarding animation are music centered, because that's what kind of separates them apart, and they're kind of codified to their own individual style. Because when you imagine someone dancing to that kind of music, you already get a sense of what kind of animation they are doing, right? And so in that way, I do believe that there are common denominators between what animators appreciate in music. I do believe this changes based on what your experience or relative school of thought regarding animation is, right? I do think this becomes more difficult to pin down the less specific you are in your definition of animation. For me, it's really easy to determine what kinds of music are best for animation because my definition of animation is specific.
Right.
So if musicality is simply creating harmony between the movement and the music, right, then the kinds of music should emulate the goals of the dance style that I'm aiming to convey. They should fit together. I shouldn't be fighting the song to do what I want to do.
The movement, right.
Right. Or there should be adequate opportunity for me to share what I want to share through animation, right? This is not always true in every style of, in every genre of music per each style, right? So when we just, for example, when we used, in Paris Animation Week, Blondie had a popping DJ basically do the event. For reference, he did have another DJ booked. This isn't a dig at Blondie. Blondie, I love you. And he did have another DJ booked, and that DJ got like a huge gig right before, like a huge paying gig right before the battle, and so they had to swap somebody out last minute. And so the DJ did a decent job at mixing and playing for a battle, but it was very clear that they also didn't understand what animation was. And it was clear that they had experience with different kinds of animation, because every now and then the song choice would be drastically different from genre to genre-wise.
Right.
Most of the songs that they played for the animation and robot categories were popping tracks. Now, their popping is considerably more popular than both robot and animation, so it's understandable why a battle DJ would be prepared with predominantly popping music. However, it was incredibly noticeable that after 6 or 7 popping songs, there would be one song by Decap, who is a particular kind of artist. Interestingly enough, an artist that belongs to a genre I cannot even name.
Right.
So But Decap is an artist that squarely belongs into what I would otherwise consider animation music, the details of which I can go into a little bit more in terms of defining what that is. But it's noticeably different with an irregular beat pattern, typically lots of distortion, very layered sounds, and a progressive ride throughout the track that meant that effectively uh, changed the timing of the music, right? How there were points in the track that were designated with higher or lower energy, and it was done in a way where the artist, the musician, Decap, the producer, did so with conscious timing in mind when they wanted these things to happen, and it had a progressive ride so that it would go places as the song went on. Anybody who got a song by Decap in that battle got the crowd on their side 100%. Not necessarily because the crowd is more engaged, but you could tell that the dancer heard the music and became more engaged in an animated way because there was more to listen to, more timing to appreciate, and thus more space to reflect back and create this expression of illusions of time within their own movement. Now, I will say that while I was at Paris Animation Week, I asked Blondie and Bob and Andre this question of like, well, what is animation music, right? Do you need music specifically for animation? And Andre, of course, says no. And he's like, you can dance to it, you can animate to anything. And then I was like, okay, so should we then, for animation battles or animation events, specifically make playlists of all kinds of music, literally spanning every possibly conceivable genre within human existence to dance to? Does that sound like the experience you want? And both of them immediately kind of went, and I was like, okay, so what's the difference between that? They immediately said, how do they follow up? I think Andre said something to the effect of, well, there's just some music that's a little that helps you get into the mood a little bit easier. And that's my point, is that there does exist music that helps animators get into that mood a little bit easier. This is also reflected when you teach a new student for the first time. Yes, Andre and Blondie, some of the greatest in the game, right, in animation, incredible talents, can definitely dance to anything. Would you expect someone who's never done animation before to be able to understand how to interpret music in such a way as to express animation? Is that a fair thing that we can give to new dancers? Just pick any song. And it's like, I feel like that's at least an intermediate concept, not a day one concept. And I think from the fact that we can see this from both perspectives, both at the top of the game, say, well, there are songs that, help get me in the mood, and at the bottom where it's like, I don't really know what the feeling of this, what this is supposed to feel like, right? We can see that there is a vacuum for where animation music wants to exist, but no one has really stepped up and been like, bang, this is animation music.
Yes.
Right? And you don't even have to be exclusive in that. You can simply say, this is animation music. This is what our community considers animation music. Whether that's your neighborhood or your state or your country or your side of the world, whatever it is, just the concept of being able to understand what animation music is for you can greatly affect how you will end up dancing.
Right.
The US was greatly influenced first initially by dubstep, or at least when I saw this, right? Dubstep clearly was an example of this.
You're saying was a clearly example of.
Sorry, it's a clear example of the music causing people to want to get interested into animation.
Okay, dubstep. Yep, that's true. Dragon House, boom, dun, 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 dun,
Right.
all that.
And dubstep, or effectively brostep, as the UK eventually likes to call it, the the sort of extremified version of the UK culture, um, really accentuated its timing, really focused on making things with a lot of contrast. The purpose was to showcase sounds that clashed, timing that clashed, frequencies with significant distortion, and people really got attracted to this, and especially dancers who were interested in exploring concepts of timing and techniques that surrounded the illusion of time, whether they acknowledged this in that way or not. It became exciting. It became the progressive ride through the song, the build-up, the drop, the sustain, right? The going back into the verse, right? There was a progression through the songs that instinctively people learned to internalize, and they began to dance differently to different parts of the song.
Right.
Unlike, let's say, for instance, taking a break from a breakbeat and just extending it. So it just remains consistent. Unlike original dubstep, which is pretty consistent over time. Unlike a lot of popping beats that are oftentimes looped so that everyone gets the opportunity to get, quote unquote, the best part of the song. But the best part of the song for them is something that focuses on allowing us to showcase the power of the hit. Whereas in animation, there are a lot of different elements within how we interpret time and illusions of time. And so you'd find that when the song increased in energy and timing, i.e. the percussion became faster, you started seeing more ticking, more strobing, more of these kinds of effects, more vibration being used. And when the energy of the song went down, even if the tempo stayed the same, people naturally began to use slow motion techniques, iterations of illusions of time that created something that was slower. People began to internalize these things in that way, and I would honestly say that the quote unquote dubstep era of dancers was a sort of missed opportunity because we didn't understand what animation was. I think a lot of the people who really committed to the ethos of dubstep dancing, even though as a collective it fell apart from basically this double standard of popping, saying, like, calling them out, being like, well, you can't be dubstep dancers. You are us.
You're doing popping.
You're doing popping. But then when they went to popping events, they'd be left out of the room, thus creating the double standard of popping. And so it just left people who were interested in animation but didn't know what it was to either quit dancing or to just kind of like live their lives as homebodies. Or to be really, if their community existed, it was in really small pockets, which still is prevalent today, right? You go around the world and popping is dominant, and everyone, a lot of the animators that I know who live abroad, right, would say that they kind of have this same idea of like, yeah, I'm kind of like the only animator in my town, or like there's like 2 or 3 of us, and it's like, but when you travel often enough, you find out that there's 2 or 3 of you in every town. And there's a lot more of us that are really there. We just haven't collectively come together to acknowledge each other. And this is kind of how, like, the idea of like 2 ships passing in the night. We just missed that opportunity. We missed that opportunity to like recognize that dubstep was a potential call for people to join in for animation.
Right.
Obviously, the people who were super passionate about it still did it and would still recognize that as a cultural inspiration for them. I count myself as one of them. But this is kind of what I would say about the music, right? And so I think Uh, if that's why I kind of was hoping to talk about music on a separate thing, because it's a fairly, there's a lot that goes into it,
Right.
and you can't really talk about the music of animation without talking about who determines what the music of animation is. And this really comes from the idea of who has cultural input to animation, or from an even larger perspective, who has cultural say in these dance styles at all.
Animation.
Right, or even popping,
Popping.
hip hop, right? Who gets to determine what is hip hop,
New York,
right?
USA.
A lot of dancers abroad, a lot of people who study this kind of stuff abroad, a lot of times you'll find that they focus so much on foundation because their focus is to pay respect to this culture that they see themselves apart from, not a part of. Right? They don't necessarily have the lived experience, so they feel like they can't really connect to that in that way. And there is something to that, right?
Right.
Doing that in a respectful way is very understandable, and honestly preferable. We want people to respect the culture.
Of course.
However, it gets to a point where we're now in this position where the significant portion of my experience, whether I'm in Asia, Russia, Europe, whatever, all these places, right? They have they kind of like look to the U.S. for answers.
Right. Like that's the source. That's like
right, which causes two things that I notice. It causes the schism in sort of this idea of who is allowed to be a creator. And it definitely shows that it definitely reinforces this idea of, if you take a more creative approach to your dance expression abroad, you are less likely to be well received. You are less likely to be lauded or quote unquote pass prelims, these kinds of things, to get external validation, right? And then it also kind of creates this idea of Americans kind of unknowingly dictating what the culture is, right? As people who live in Los Angeles, we kind of sit on the fence in this area because we didn't grow up with the lived experience of watching these styles develop. We were not the pioneers. We came after things were already developed, things were already being taught in class. We joined this later on. And then once we joined that culture, the difference is, in the US, we're kind of taught that we can be participants and active creators within that culture, just because of the ethos of the US and how we're basically brought up and on individuality and these kinds of things, celebrating creativity, celebrating unique perspectives, right? And so we kind of unknowingly help create this culture, right? And I think any healthy culture retains a level of equal balance between protecting what was and creating what can be, creating what's next. It's not, to me, if you veer too much to protecting the culture, you throw it in a museum and then it becomes dead. And that's what creates what I refer to as the locking effect, this idea that a style is no longer accepting creative input. Yes. And then we veer to the other direction, right? If you veer too much to the other side and you don't actually protect the culture,
and it changes
then
everyone's.
then we kind of have what happened with hip hop and choreo dance, where all of a sudden people are not using any of the bounces in hip hop, calling it hip hop, and it's just kind of like a lot of people from the street dance community look at hip hop in the choreography scene and they're just like, that's not hip hop.
Right.
These are completely different values,
Mm,
right?
mhm.
If you look at it from the perspective of like, okay, these are schools of thought within representation of what hip hop is.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean you have to agree with them.
Mhm.
It just means that when you're in this environment, you can translate what they're talking about. When they say hip hop, they mean this,
Right.
right? When you're in the Bronx, when they say hip hop, they mean this,
Right.
right? You're probably going to have two different experiences.
Memphis, Florida, Atlanta,
The suburbs
right, the
versus
south, north,
yeah,
the city, the outright.
exactly. And so that's a long way to kind of go about saying that there is an underpinning root of who gets to decide they are a creator for determining what music we dance to, what music we listen to. And so a lot of times the rest of the world kind of looks at US creators for inspiration on this. Not always, but in general, this has been a pattern, right? We got to see the popularity of dubstep spread worldwide. We also got to see the popularity of artists that are a little bit more experimental. And now we're dipping into this genre that I can't even name. It's really unfortunate that the musical genre that fits animation the best, I literally cannot define. Because in music, it has come to the same lack of agreement,
Right.
where there is no consensus about what this music is called. And it's like, we could get two birds with one scone here and just get them to just call it animation music. That way the music producers are just like, sure, we needed a term for this anyway.
That's the music.
And then the dancers can just agree that like, yes, this is exactly what we dance to. But for now, I have my own category, school of thought from music. A US focused animation music tends to include artists like Thriftworks,
Just about
Decap, Quiet Bison. We're talking about artists who produce music with irregular beat patterns. We're talking about artists who use significant distortion or effects that are that can be perceived to be that are not afraid to induce emotions other than like either joy or rage or anything. Like it can be wails, there can be wailing in the music, although this isn't one of the defining characteristics of an animation. If I had to break down the common denominators between what I've found animators like to dance to, it would be these things. One, irregular beat pattern.
Okay.
So whereas popping has the boom, cat, boom, cat, boom, cat, even if it changed up, boom, cat, ba-boom, boom, cat, boom, cat, ba-boom, boom, cat. An animator can very well dance to this, but someone who is looking to express lots of different kinds of illusions of time and very different kinds of timing would not expressly prefer a song that stays the same throughout, that remains a constant. It would enjoy change. Yes.
Would you say that it's almost like the animator has to extra themselves? They have to put more. They have to become more irregular on top of the music to show the animation.
They look irregular on top of the music to show animation. That's the difference. Is they would probably still do the same thing and at different points, and it would be motivated by the music. In order to really showcase the timing or the illusions of their own timing, a lot of times they would have to either extend their techniques to fit a 4/4 beat pattern, which is, Frantic does this pretty well whenever he goes into something that is using the techniques within the illusion of time, right? He will hold and stretch that technique for a significant period of time, more so than what a lot of other poppers would do. A lot of times poppers will just hold for 4 counts, do a concept for 4 counts, maybe 8 if they're feeling risky, right? Whereas Frantic will sit in that pocket, right, and really be able to switch up his animation within popping music, right? But this is showing someone who is actively using their timing, matching it with popping music. That doesn't necessarily mean that that is the best music to showcase animation, although clearly it's not an impediment,
Right.
right? Popping music isn't inherently an impediment to animation. It just means that if your focus is on timing and you're given a constant, then you're going to predominantly showcase everything related to that constant. If your music changes, you get greater opportunity to show your own changes.
Right.
Right?
They're meeting each other.
Yes, exactly. And you can leave the music and come back, right? That's another part of the relationship with music, another part of musicality. So these kinds of things do inform what kind of music helps people, quote unquote, look animated or get in the mindset of being animated.
Right.
So that's the first one, right? Having this irregular beat pattern. This kind of goes hand in hand with having a progressive beat pattern. So we want changes in the song over time. We want to see the song go up and go down, right? This isn't always conducive for a battle, because if you get the part of the song that goes slower, then sometimes people get bummed out about that. But that gets me into my next point, which is that doesn't really matter if you have a song that is filled with layers. When you have a song that has a consistent amount of layers, as an animator, even if the energy in the song decreases, you're still able to play with timing because there's multiple layers left within the song for you to take that energy and channel it through.
Ooh, okay.
So whether the energy goes up or whether the energy goes down, animators still feel at home. And I would actually suggest that this is where animators find their home, is when the energy or the tempo is really, really high, right? Or when the energy or tempo, not to be used interchangeably, literally the energy of the song as it's built, or whether the tempo of the song is actually very, very low. That's where a lot of animators find their home musically, right? I tend to find that animators either like really, really fast songs, Tabo, like we'll dance to drum and bass, Doki Doki music, right? Like a lot of this kind of stuff, that's a little bit faster. And then, we talked a lot about Dragon House, and that seems to be a good way to go back, right?
Thriftworks,
right,
wants to be all weird,
is very low. Yes. The BPM of those songs tend to be lower than traditional hip hop songs that are played in ciphers or battles, right? And so, and the thing about Thriftworks is, because of his layering, there's always something to play with. It never, even if the energy goes down, it never feels like a dull moment. This is why Thriftworks has been a consistent staple of US American animation playlists for like the last 10 years, right? And he keeps coming out with music, so we keep being like, yes, like that kind of stuff. So and this style of production is becoming more and more prevalent. So those few things, plus, I'm not sure if I said this, a preference for distortion and filters, right? Making sounds like actively breaking sounds, actively getting them into such a way where the sonic expression of the distortion, creating a texture in the audio, gives us a texture within to replicate or to play with, right? So whether it's like the sound of crumpling paper, like right, like makes you want to like, right, or you'll hear like water drops, like those kinds of things, and you'll have like a float like coming off of that, right? Like in that sense, will help will help give people, like regardless of whatever form you're doing, like if you're waving because it's water,
Right.
right? But that water droplet noise helps motivate where you were making your choices for speed control, thus creating an illusion of time, right? Perpetuating this idea, consistent within that framework, the technique school of thought of animation that I keep talking about. So I think that's it. I think those are the 5 big common denominators that I've noticed. Again, that is an irregular beat pattern. It is a progressive song that is layered, right? Usually has a lot of track layers within it, that uses the tempo of which tends to be either like higher or lower, and then also focuses on significant amounts of distortion. Those tend to be like the 5 common elements. Animation music doesn't need to have all of those elements per se, but these tend to be where animators gather.
Nice.
Right. If you find yourself in this animation cipher, and someone's like, "Hey, put on some like animation music," like not just popping music to animate to, not just another genre of music to animate to, but animation music. What is it? Usually the songs will contain some combination of these features. Usually the more the merrier.
Right. I like how you've explained again these pillars of animation, of what people seem to be gravitating towards, of what is animation, and the music of what seems to be the common denominators.
Yes.
And then as they say, right, the dance and the music, they're intertwined. The dance comes from the music inspires. There's that relationship. So it makes sense. And it sounds like, would you say if we can say this is animation music, then we would discover more of the movement?
They're directly related,
right?
And I think
either one.
I think it's actually they confirm each other, right? Because if your definition of animation comes from a perspective of just being weird,
right,
then any music you consider weird could also fit that definition. Right. So if you consider something like polka music weird, not that polka is weird. We love all genres of music here. Just as an example,
I don't.
It's not.
I don't like country. No, I'm just. I mean, I don't. I haven't heard something good. Send me something good. Maybe then I'll feel okay.
If there's something, if somebody considers like a genre of music weird, like polka or like country music, for example, and you play that for an animator, does that naturally make you want to animate? Well, it could if it included some of those other elements, as far as the musical elements that we just discussed. But if it doesn't, then it's kind of like we're back to square one and being like, what are we doing?
Right.
What are we really expressing here?
Right.
And it's like one thing if you're like proud of your heritage and your father plays the accordion and is in a polka band and you want to dance to polka music, so you do it because that's your heritage and you're combining it with your newfound expression and love for animation, and you combine those things together, right? Like that is you actively taking your identity and combining it with your expression to create your work of art in that moment, right? And so similarly, right, whether we know it or not, when we're choosing to dance to music while animating, we are informing what can be considered animation music. So this is one of the reasons why I think it's best that the sooner we can get more codified principles of what music can be to animate to, then the sooner we can get like an actual like codified genre, right? And so in this way, it's not just going for this goal, it's also recognizing the longer we just accept popping music as animation music, the more we the more we don't really accept who we actually are.
Right.
Now, remember, this is all based on what your perspective of animation is.
The school of house, the thoughts.
If you come from the perspective of electro-funk music is animation music, then there is no separation between popping music and, or especially of that era, and animation music. They're one and the same, right? You're talking about Kraftwerk, right? Kraftwerk Numbers, any of those songs, you know what I mean? And like when you're talking about these things, right? They've already got it. They know what they like to dance to, and that's how they think about it. So from that perspective, it's like the question's already been answered for them.
Right.
But for just about everyone else, except for the dubstep dancers, right? We're still looking. We're still figuring out like what is the actual definition of animation. It's gotten to the point. I'm sorry.
The animation music.
What is the definition of animation music?
What is the music?
Yes. I recognize I misspoke. I was already like thinking about my next sentence. And so when we're talking about like music for battles, right? One of the interesting parallels that I've been finding is that what's happening abroad is that a lot of playlists are split now. It's no longer just popping music. Half the playlist is about popping music, and half the playlist is like hip-hop Eurobeats.
This is what's common, you're saying, at
this
battles
is kind of
overseas.
This is kind of what's happening. This is what was playing